Good afternoon. Welcome to the December 7th, 2011 session of the Cape Cod Regional Government Assembly of Delegates. I'd like to call this meeting to order, and we will begin with a moment of silence to honor our troops who have died in service to our country and all those serving our country in the armed forces. Thank you, and now we'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The clerk will call the roll.
Richard Anderson.
Here.
Cheryl Andrews.
Here.
Ronald Bergstrom.
Here.
Leo Kukunis. Christopher Kanega. James Killian.
Here.
Marcia King.
Here.
Thomas Lynch.
Here.
Teresa Martin.
Here.
Deborah McCutcheon.
Here.
Spiro Mirtakostas.
Here.
John Ullman. Paul Pilcher. Anthony Scalise.
Here.
Julia Taylor. Mr. Speaker, we have a quorum present with 81.39% of the delegates present, 18.61% absent.
Thank you. At this point, I'd like to notify everyone that this meeting is being recorded by the members of the media. So now we will move on to approval of the calendar of business, which you have in front of you. Do you have a motion to approve today's calendar?
Move approval of calendar of business.
Second.
Moved and seconded. No further comment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, now you should have received a copy of the Journal of November 16th. Is there any additions or corrections to the Journal? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the Journal?
Motion to approve the Journal of November 16th.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, and now come to our favorite part of our meeting, communications from the Board of Regional Commissioners. Welcome.
And a cheerful good afternoon to one and all. I'm glad to see that all of you were able to make it through the mist. It's still warm. It could be snow, I guess. There are two things that I'll start with the happy part first. Our annual lunch, to which all of the assembly is invited, is going to be on December 21st at 12 noon in rooms 11 and 12. It's being catered as opposed to the bologna sandwiches that we used to give you. We'll have a fairly nice lunch there, so you're all welcome to come, 12 to 2 on the 21st of December. We are submitting a request for a supplemental transfer of funds for the Children's Cove for $8,000. This is a request that grows out of a requirement that has been given by the district attorney and approved by the police chiefs on Cape Cod. Barnstable County is presently the only one that does not record the forensic sessions that are taking place at Children's Cove. Stacey Gallagher has finally gotten support from the district attorney for approval to do that, but she needs this equipment in order to go forward. It would be our wish that you could expedite this, because the sooner we do this, the sooner we would have things in place that would protect the interest of those children that are subject to this sexual abuse forensic interview. So those are the two things that I wanted to bring up today. I believe you're having a visit from our esteemed mission director later on.
Bill, I have your ordinance in front of me, and it says approved by the Board of County Commissioners January 7th, 2011. Is that a mistake?
It's a typo.
Okay, so it should have been December
December
7th. Okay, which is today. Okay. Okay, I guess we can try to get that expedited as judiciously as possible, but
Yeah, he said it was, video, it is
Yeah.
video recording.
Okay, is there anything else for, anybody have any questions, Tom? Yeah?
Good afternoon. I had a question from a constituent regarding the appointment of a county clerk. Could you update us on where that might stand?
The county clerk process is in process. It is our hope that we'll have it completed by the end of the year. For those that might be concerned with regard to the election process, I think we all know that in the beginning of the process, the signature pages are made available from Secretary of State of the Commonwealth, and they're usually distributed through the town clerks. Once the signatures are completed, then they go through a process of back to the town clerks for verification, and at that point, it would come to the county clerk for final assembly and transmission to the Secretary of State. We're making every effort to get this finished by the end of the year. It's one that needs to be done, and we will do it.
Okay, anything else? Yeah, John?
We're rounding the halfway point, Mr. Commissioner, on the Registry of Deeds. How do we stand?
We're about 3% behind on revenue, but in terms of should we be in a panic mode, no.
Is that revenues behind last year, or revenues behind projected revenues?
Revenues behind last year, I think that's how I heard it when Mark told us today.
Anybody else? Well, you might want to stay around for the wastewater, you may not, I don't know.
Well, remember that we're in the middle of making our reports to the towns that have been very well received, and at this point, we are posting them as they are completed, as they're sort of extracted from from the record, and there has not been one town that has not been interested in having access to it. They are posted on the webpage so that as they get completed. So we're completed through, let's see, last night was Dennis, thank you, was Dennis, and I missed you last night, John. You told me how much you wanted to go. Did you watch us on TV? Spiro was there representing the Dennis Chamber of Commerce. Oh, how are you feeling now? Through the chair. Okay, you feeling okay? Okay, good.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, you have a question here from the delegate.
Yeah, just so I understand, what is the process that you've been following to appoint a county clerk?
What is the process?
Yeah, and when did it start, and what's the process been?
Well, when Scott Nickerson resigned from that position, we looked at it and looked at several options, and we had a process where Mark was looking or making recommendations on different options with regard to it. We have not followed any particular process so far.
By Mark, you mean?
Mark Zielinski.
Mark Zielinski, okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Next, we have communications from Cape Cod Commission Executive Director Paul Nizwicki. When I put this on the agenda, I was expecting that the announcement coming out of the courts would be a little more substantive than it actually turned out to be, but Paul will give us a heads up and give us his idea of where we are.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the record, Paul Nizwicki, Executive Director of the Cape Cod Commission. I don't really like scripts that much, but I don't like being held in contempt of court either, so I'm going to read a brief sort of synopsis of where we are on the lawsuit to date. The Conservation Law Foundation and the Buzzards Bay Coalition filed 2 federal lawsuits against EPA seeking further federal regulatory involvement to reduce nitrogen contamination on Cape Cod. The county and the Cape Cod Commission received demand letters from the Conservation Law Foundation and the Buzzards Bay Coalition, but have not yet been added to either litigation. This fall, the parties to the federal suits, EPA, including the Department of Justice, the Conservation Law Foundation, and the Buzzards Bay Coalition have been trying to reach a settlement of these lawsuits through mediation. The county and the Cape Cod Commission participated in the mediation to try to make sure that the interests of Cape Cod residents and businesses were adequately considered. Additionally, the state's Department of Environmental Protection has been participating in the mediation. As a condition of the participation in the mediation, the county and the commission and the state were required, and all parties were required to sign a confidentiality agreement which prohibits all participants from publicly disclosing the substance of the mediation process. Thus, we can't discuss the substance of anything that happened in those meetings to anyone who is not a direct party of that mediation. The Cape Cod Commission and the county made its perspective on the nitrogen problem and the need for a cost-effective solution known to the parties during the mediation sessions to date. However, given that the commission and the county are not parties in the federal litigation, it was not appropriate for us to continue to participate in further mediation sessions, especially those including detailed settlement negotiations. Thus, as of November 30th, we formally withdrew from our ongoing mediation. And with that, I would make myself available for any questions and try to answer them as well as I can.
I anticipated that there would be questions on this because it was noticed in the paper, and following our new procedures, if I anticipate there's going to be substantive discussion, we have to put it on the agenda to follow.
Okay.
So that's why we dragged you here today, Paul.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions on this, or was I wrong? Spiro.
Paul, does this in any way hinder or enhance the Cape Cod Commission's ability to look at a regional wastewater mitigation plan?
No, well, from our perspective, it's full steam ahead. I mean, we were really there to provide information, to advocate, as we have been since the creation of the Water Protection Collaborative, for a solution on Cape that was both environmentally effective and cost effective. So we will continue, given the requirements of the Cape Cod Commission Act, our agreement with the Cape Cod Water Protection Collaborative, and our charge from the state legislature in the past budget to move forward with a regional plan.
Could you venture a timeline on how long that might take?
Yeah, we're hopeful. We were looking at a 12 to 18-month planning process, so we anticipate that we will have something substantive, at least in draft form, by the end of next calendar year. But it's what we're anticipating is more than just a plan. It's also a document that's going to have some fairly dynamic tools associated with it, GIS tools I think towns will find helpful, and people will find helpful as they try to understand this. And those should come online sooner and probably be available in late winter, early spring.
Could you describe the relationship between the commission and the collaborative regarding this plan?
Yeah, both the commission and the collaborative, both in the act and in the collaborative's ordinance, were charged with regional planning efforts associated with wastewater. However, neither were really defined. So we got together with the collaborative, I think it was about 3 years ago, and agreed to do one plan instead of two separate plans, which really didn't make much sense. So we've been working pretty closely with the collaborative on that, and we've been providing them updates as necessary.
Last thing, so there's no concurrent or parallel effort going on at the collaborative?
No.
It's the commission?
Yeah, we are pretty much in lockstep as it relates to the regional plan.
John, did you have?
It was just a brief question. It seems to me that this lawsuit hinges on if they can prove that nitrogen-loaded septic systems are point source, I'm not sure. Do you see any real ability for them to sue individuals or towns successfully just because the Conservation Law Foundation wants them to?
I think the legal claim in the pleadings has been oversimplified to suggest that EPA has to find some hydrological connection between a Title V system, for example, and navigable waters of the U.S., to use the verbiage of the Clean Water Act. It's a little bit broader than that, and it wouldn't be the first time that EPA has done that. So I think, I've read a lot about, this would be 40 years of overturning practice. That's just wrong. It's not right. And the EPA has some fairly wide jurisdiction and discretion, and to suggest that they can't or to suggest that somehow it's laughable or ridiculous, or to suggest that people should bury their head in the sand and believe that it's not possible is a recklessly irresponsible perspective to take, given the Clean Water Act law. All you have to do is look at situations in Georgia, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, under consent orders where basically municipalities have been bankrupted by these consent orders. All you have to do is look at Chesapeake Bay, where CLF has been and interacted with EPA, or Lake Champlain, as recently as last year, where CLF intervened and for the first time had total maximum daily loads that were approved by EPA overturned and taken away from the state so that the EPA would draft them on their own. So it's really frustrating to hear such oversimplifications, especially when they come from lawyers. I mean, everybody's entitled to their public opinion, but I think you have an obligation as a member of the bar to be competent when you publicly state a legal opinion and dismiss it as easily as I've seen it dismissed publicly.
And on that point, we may not be looking at a legal opinion here, because if it's in mediation, we could be looking more for an agreement between the parties. In other words, CLF and I guess it's the Buzzard Bay Coalition
Yes.
would agree to drop their suit, and in turn, EPA would agree to do certain things. Is that what you're looking at? Or
yeah,
to demand certain things of others?
I think it's always been an oversimplification to assume that the federal action would be a mandate by a federal judge. EPA has a practice of settling these cases, and again, I would refer you to the Lake Champlain case in the state of Vermont, and I would refer you to Chesapeake Bay.
Okay, so that we don't know, well, I know that you're constrained by confidentiality, but we, obviously, the Cape is concerned is what could be in this agreement, and especially if it affects parties who are not currently party to the agreement.
Right.
For instance, the towns are
Yep.
not party to the agreement, they could be affected. So, I mean, is it, right now, the responsibility for cleaning up groundwater lies with the individual towns? Is that an oversimplification?
No,
also?
I think that's an incorrect statement.
Okay.
Pretty effectively, given that 3% of the parcels on the Cape are actually hooked up to any sort of centralized collection system, or accounting for only 15% of the flows. Most of these towns have no infrastructure at all and have no means by which to sort of immediately sort of initiate that kind of action. I think it's been foolish on many people's parts to assume that this wasn't going to be real until the towns get sued, because I don't believe that the towns have ever been in the crosshairs. I mean, clearly, when you look at the pleadings, and I go back to those pleadings, they are looking at property owners and individual responsibility to property owners. They are not looking at the towns. And I think that's been obvious from day one, and I think people that assume otherwise have made a grave error on that point.
So what I'm thinking of is, will EPA directly mandate that I, as a property owner, or somebody else, clean up our septic system or do certain things? So it'll be a federal mandate. So in a sense, it's going to circumvent, you think they're going to circumvent the town's normal authority over septic systems and so on?
Well, it's actually a state authority over Title V systems. So again, it's not a town authority. The state's at the table. There are any number of things that could happen, and I'm not sure what direction EPA or the state DEP will take, but they have tools to mandate compliance.
Okay.
The problem that I see, I think we would be better off to come up with our own solution rather than to wait for a state or federal solution mandating an imperfect situation.
I don't want to. This is something I've been involved with for a while, so that's why I'm interested in it. But I mean, obviously, if the federal government, the EPA, demands that I clean up my septic system, and my neighbor does, and his neighbor, and so on and so all the way down the street, it's going to point us toward a more collective solution. In other words, rather than each one of us going out there with the shovel and doing something.
I agree, and I think you're probably missing a couple of steps in between.
Okay.
But that's sort of the direction that the pleadings state. So it has nothing to do with anything that happened in the mediation, but the pleadings pretty clearly lay out the direction of the lawsuit, and the pleadings also pretty clearly lay out what CLF believes to be a responsibility by the Cape Cod Commission inherited from our predecessor agency, CCPEDC, as it relates to regional planning obligations under Section 208 of the Clean Water Act.
Yeah, that's
So
what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is, if indeed we're all individually responsible, but just from cost effectiveness and a practical standpoint, we're going to have to collaborate, what is the vehicle by which we're going to do that collaboration?
Yeah, well, I think as was stated earlier, the regional plan is really the first effort to sort of look at some of these potential, I mean, we have a lot of information. I mean, we've got 46 nitrogen-sensitive watersheds, 2/3 of them cross town lines. So I'd like to know how towns independently moving with different engineering companies are going to be able to solve some of these shared watershed issues. And so we have to move more collectively. And I think I'm hopeful that the state or the federal government might provide some incentives to do that rather than just to lower a regulatory hammer of sorts.
Okay, I pushed you enough on this, to get from Tom and then Deborah.
On the planning process you're outlining, does that include looking at funding models? I know that's been ongoing, and
Yeah.
I wonder if we're going to see that sooner or later, or where's that stand?
It will, I think we'll be able to take a look at some of the financing models and some of the rate models much sooner than the end of the calendar year. The plan will involve not only a water quality database associated with the MEP, but also a land use database that ultimately will interface with a rate model where we can plug in different aspects of funding to see how it's spread around. And it's my hope that we can start to have a cost-based discussion with the Cape at large in the spring or early summer. Because I think that's where most of the resistance comes from, and I think we have to get that out of the way right now. And just looking back at sort of the Education Reform Act in 1993, and any of those formula-based situations that we dealt with as a coastal community, I think it's important for us as a region to get out front and define what we can afford as it relates to this solution, and then put that gap back on the federal and state government and say, hey, this is fair. So I would anticipate that we would have those models ready earlier than the final plan, and we're going to start that discussion.
By we, you mean
The commission.
the commission, okay. Deborah?
You said, you said that the commission and the county had withdrawn from the mediation
Yes.
process. Is DEP still there?
I'm unsure. I'm unsure as to whether they had another session on Monday. I don't know what transpired at that, so I can't answer as to whether DEP is still there. I believe they were still there on Monday. I don't know if they're still there now.
Well, what I'm understanding that you're talking about is that Conservation Law Foundation and EPA could well enter into a settlement agreement that could impact the cities and towns, the county, and that allegations are made about your obligations, Cape Cod Commission's obligations
Yeah.
with respect to clean water. You weren't sued. You decided not to intervene, or?
We haven't been sued yet, and this is where it gets to be a little bit tricky. For example, if you asked me my opinion on whether we are obligated under Section 208 of the Clean Water Act, that's a difficult question to answer without, I would defend that as we have defended that we don't. We're not the responsible party there. But others may have another opinion, and to sort of, I wouldn't want to necessarily state that publicly. But as you know, Deborah, being a lawyer, if you're a plaintiff, you may prefer federal court over state court, so it may be that you don't join or move immediately against potential defendants that would have you wind up in one forum instead of another.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it should shock anybody that there have been claims made but that haven't been perfected against certain potential defendants yet.
And this action's pending in federal court?
There are actions pending in federal court.
And the mediation is for the federal court action. Is there a state court action too?
There is no state court action as of yet. There is only the federal court action. The mediation was part of that federal court action. And I've also read in the paper, EPA hasn't even answered the complaint yet. Really standard process, the mediation comes first. And even from our perspective, not only would we want to be interested joined as interested parties to advocate on behalf of cost-effective solutions, because I don't see cost in the pleadings anywhere. It's also preferable to mediate solutions rather than litigate from an expense perspective, so.
Yep.
Can I get one more shot?
What's that?
Can I get one more shot?
Yeah,
at
go
Paul?
right ahead.
Paul, will it,
It's not a shot. You're.
I wanted to give you.
Go ahead, take a shot, Sparrow.
I guess a two-part question, so I don't have to ask it in two parts, but in two questions. Would your process of coming up with a plan be assisted by implementing a DCPC? And do you need any more money to do this?
To answer the first one as it relates to a DCPC, that's a determination that we haven't made yet. I would, if I use sort of the ocean DCPC as an example, I mean, that's something that we undertook and formulated a new process in order to involve the communities as part of that planning process. But what comes with it is a mandatory moratorium. And I would not be in favor of a moratorium that in any way affected people's ability to install or rehabilitate existing Title V systems. But that doesn't mean we couldn't tailor a DCPC that didn't have that effect. On the second issue, we've been given $150,000 from the state. Part of our offline discussions with EPA and DEP have been about money for the planning effort. And really, we're going to start the process and put our resources behind it and do as much as we can. To the extent that we need more funds associated with it, we'll come back and have that discussion probably as part of the budget.
As a comment more than a question, I would be interested in a moratorium on municipal planning while you're coming up with
that would be a possibility.
That would be something I would prefer to see. And in terms of money, I wouldn't be shy about asking for some.
Well, I appreciate that.
Okay, Julia?
Well, based on what I know about Falmouth's situation and what little I know about other towns, I am very glad that you and the collaborative are on the case, and I'm excited that you feel there'll be some significant progress within a year, less than a year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Paul, do you think that anything that comes out of the current mediation will deal both with an acceptance? Right now the question is the acceptance of the responsibility for the EPA and whether or not they can indeed mandate certain things. But do you think it'll be do you think it'll be more inclusive than that and go to the mediation and settlement or whatever would include specific actions that have to be taken and name parties to do it? So what are we looking at here? Are we looking simply saying, is CLF simply saying to the federal government, you've been dragging your feet on this and you should have pressured the local authorities, and do you accept responsibility for that? Or you think they're going to go further and say, here's what you're going to do. You're going to have these people do this, in returns. That's what I'm looking at, is how specific are they going to be, and if indeed they do come to a settlement.
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, that's the most honest answer I can give you. I don't know. There is such a wide perspective of possibilities that I would be, I really don't know what they're going to do.
Can you see a point where the Cape Cod Commission is named in the settlement of this without your being at the table? In other words, can they mandate us to do certain things? I mean, that's really the issue.
Yeah, I don't think I can answer that question.
Okay, well, yeah, that's fine. Anything else? Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, are there any communications from public officials? Any communications from members of the public? Hearing none, I'll now convene the assembly, and we will continue our discussion on the activities of the Special Commission on County Governance, which met again on the last day of November, I think it was, the 30th. Julia, you want to give it?
I wasn't able to be at that meeting because I had to. Microphone, please. I'm sorry, I wasn't at the meeting. I've heard about it, but I wasn't there, so I'm not a good person to report.
I want to think who was there. Were you there? All right, how about giving us a report so I don't have to do it?
I think Teresa was there
Oh,
from the
Teresa was
beginning.
there, too.
I was a little bit late.
Okay, now we got-
She actually spoke, and there were presentations from the Business Roundtable, which was not unexpected, but I'll let Teresa go first and then jump in.
Spiro was there also. We have multiple people, I guess we can kind of report.
In interest of kicking off the conversation, I submitted some comments in a memo form to the rest of you, which partially described what I heard at the Special Commission meeting that Ron's referring to. What I didn't put in my memo is that Teresa stole the show. Her testimony directing people's attention to a process which includes form, follow, function, if I got that right, really was spot on, although personally I thought it went over a lot of people's heads on that commission. Hope your written comments are taken to heart. The 2 points I wanted to relay was that the Business Roundtable put forward their proposal. In very short form, they're advocating for a strong executive appointed by a new set of commissioners. And that single branch of elected commissioners, which would number somewhere between 5 and 9, would be elected by both district and at large. They would like to complement that structure with a advisory finance board comprised of the 15 town managers of the Cape Towns. It's a plan. The League of Women Voters, which I found to be of interest as well, are recommending a similar strong single county executive, but popularly elected, where the Business Roundtable recommends he be or she be appointed. But they also suggested, if I'm getting this straight, that the commissioners continue to be elected popularly and that assembly delegates continue to be elected popularly. However, that they both be elected from districts rather than from either at large or a town basis. Again, both starting points for a discussion. I didn't add my comments there. I was going to wait to do them here, so at the speaker's discretion, I can wait, or go ahead.
Are we on that in the agenda?
Would you like me to get into my own comments, or are we still talking about what happened at the meeting?
Did we convene?
Did we convene yet or not?
Yes, we convened.
Sorry.
Is today Wednesday? Why don't we find out, why don't we get a report of what happened to the committee? I concur with Spiro that we concentrated more finally on the structure of county government and recommendations to change that structure. And Teresa had some comments that she gave publicly, and I'll pass it over to her.
Well, I was just actually going to add, George also spoke about the public health department and how well it functioned, and he had a really excellent point, which was that there are all these pieces that are working really well. And so in any changes that happen, please remember what's working really well and not undermine that. And he described kind of an organic growth where they put out lots of carrots, and over time the carrots multiply, and the number of services that are being offered because different towns want them has become wide and broad, and along the way it's developed a revenue base as well, and that it's a kind of a nice model of one way that regional services can be provided, almost coming from the bottom up, being driven by demand as opposed to kind of from the top down. And it is working, and I thought he had a very good point, which is if something's working, how can we keep an environment where those kinds of things can continue to work? That was a very good point. And Dave Schrofer, who is chairing the Intermunicipal Committee on the Lower Cape, also spoke. And he talked about some of the things that are working amongst the towns down there, ways that they're using some different mechanisms to work together and to be able to do collaborative efforts and get some economies of scale. And again, it was another example of something that is working. So those were two good points, I thought.
Did we have a presentation on another presentation on the Open Cape, or was that the week before? No, it was something. Somebody else was there, but you can, if you want to give those comments, Spiro, this is a good
I'd like to preface them by saying thanks to the other delegates who forwarded their comments. It kind of gives us a way to compare our thought processes to see where we're each finding a need to address current county structure. Since I provided you with, a two-page memo, I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to sort of give you a couple of quick highlights. I think the form that we have now, the structure that we have now, was at some point 20 years ago well thought out, and it seems to have been working in these last 20 years. And that I haven't been able to figure out what the overriding need was to address it in such a way that we would need to change it. I come down on the side that if there is a weakness in the current system, that we strengthen it as opposed to amputate it. I mean, just to give you a personal analogy, I needed to see a doctor. He recommended physical therapy, not surgery. So I'm not looking for surgery here. I think maybe a little physical therapy is in order. By that I mean there seems to be a bit of an imbalance in the check and balance that was incorporated in the charter, which favors the commissioners. That renders us almost, in one other delegate's phrase, a rubber stamp. I would agree with that. I think if we were going to change anything in the charter, we should be looking at giving ourselves the ability to, at the very least, amend the budget before we vote on it, which of course would require additional review by the commissioners before we pass the final budget. But it would be more similar to what goes on now in the state, in the various state governments and the federal government. It would require compromise, which currently doesn't exist. It's pretty much a take it or leave it proposition, where we might have some input at the committee review. Sometimes has effect, sometimes doesn't. I think we were pretty vocal this last time around that we didn't think the revenue figures were accurate and would hold up, but the budget proceeded with the regional revenue figures that we were presented. I think being able to hold up the budget to address significant issues like that would strengthen not only the assembly, but the structure. The second point I was making in my notes is that we seem to be here to also provide a check and balance for the regulations that are coming out of the Cape Cod Commission. We have looked at DCPCs that we have passed. We will be looking at some in the future that we may not pass, but some of the regulations that come to us, whether it's the ocean management plan, are presented again as a take it or leave it prospect without our ability to change it and send it back for further review. We can only vote things up or down. I think the ability to offer changes that would then be reviewed by the Cape Cod Commission representatives to be sent back to us for final approval would provide for a better system. And we would also, I think, serve our role better. The only caveat I would include in that is that because we are both elected, the commissioners and the delegates are elected by the same group of people, the county residents, that I'm not sure that the commissioner's role in that process isn't redundant. So I could do without it and just have commission regulations reviewed, approved, and passed by the Assembly. I'm not understanding the weighted vote arguments that keep cropping up, whether it's this year or some previous year, or whether it's in this forum or a special commission. There is, in my mind, only one thing that is more unfair than weighted voting, and that's the equal voting that goes on at the Cape Cod Commission. 8 votes, 8 of the smallest votes here comprise 22% of the population. Those same 8 votes at the Cape Cod Commission can pass a regulation. You have 22% of the population here who cannot, even though they comprise an 8-vote, 8-person majority, really can't move unless you're bringing others along with you. But 8 very small populations 8 towns can promulgate almost any regulation the commission can offer. So I would be very careful to try to change a system that seems to be working at this level in favor of a system that I don't think anyone's going to be happy with if we were to change the weighted vote structure. And I particularly like the analogies that, or at least the synopsis that Delegate McCutcheon gave us about how going to a district-based delegate voting or system where we would have fewer delegates coming out of districts would completely eliminate the smallest communities from serving at this table. You can envision the 5 towns in the Lower Cape being one district because of their population, and not to pick on Truro, but chances are you'd never see a Truro representative at this table. I would rather have each town at the table than have some towns never be here. So those are the high points. I'd like to kind of continue serving on the Assembly if that's what's in the future, with the strengthening of our powers that I enumerated.
Yes, Julia.
Did people get a copy of my little brief?
Yes, we got it emailed
Okay.
to us.
I guess this was not arranged correctly, because I think that there is pretty much not any point I see in changing the county governing structure unless it were going to be doing something different. I don't think it's not working with what it is doing now. But we're talking about $25 million. And it is a very low visibility government system, and that's because it's only $25 million that doesn't usually impact individual citizens. And so when you have a state where only half the people, when asked, could name their 2 senators in Washington, you're not going to get a lot of people vitally familiar with county government. That's sort of too bad, but we're not talking about a major operation here. Now, if we really have a different vision and we're going to be the solution to organizing wastewater, or if we're going to be the solution to organizing police and fire, or we're going to be the solution for some big expense items, I think we would need additional revenue for the government. And so if the group that I'm part of doesn't want to deal with that issue, because that is usually unpopular to talk about taxes, then I really think we're wasting our time trying to reorganize who's doing what in that government. But if we were to deal with more money and more money for more purposes, then the accountability and the visibility and the vision and the unified leadership issues do become more important. And so I could see a change to something, an elected executive. I don't really see the point of an appointed executive with 3, 5, 7 commissioners. I don't see how that adds to the visibility and the unified leadership, and I don't see the advantage there. Maybe that's my ignorance, but I don't see it. I don't know that a single elected county executive would have vision and be a dynamic leader, but there'd be a chance for it, I guess. If they had something to do that's going to grab people's attention. I really don't want somebody using this just as a step on the ladder and making up some exciting things to do. I've sort of went through that a few years back here. So if we're going to change the vision of what the county does, then I think it makes sense to make changes. It shouldn't cost more, so that was my last point. I'm less concerned about what the legislative body looked like. At the time, we had tremendous debate about it, and the reason that we went for what we have is sort of obvious, and I think it's reasonable. I wouldn't go to the mat to not change it, because I think both could be accountable to the voters, and you do need something that's operating as a check and balance. But I don't think it's obvious that 5 to 7 to 9 regionally elected people are going to be better, but I don't know that they're going to be worse, except that some people's voices will not be heard, and so that's why we went with this. So I haven't heard anything that, I think the prejudice against the Assembly is because Tom and I have a big vote, and that's been going on for quite a long time. And I can see why some people wouldn't like that and would see that that's might interfere with their ideas of what would be good, but I'm just not convinced. So I don't like to say that we have to stay this way for my sake or his, but it used to be that the small towns were complaining about that and wanted a change, but they didn't seem to understand that the change couldn't be that everyone would have an equal vote out of the 15 towns, like it is on the commission. So I think Spiro is right, feeling that, we really, that's not a legal option. So we need this group that's meeting to come up with some really good reasons why the regional district people would be better. And I'd be open to that, and I'm willing, but I haven't heard a good reason yet.
Okay. Yes, Deborah.
I think everybody did get a copy of this little memo that I put together for you. I want to say a couple of things about some of these issues. Since I've been a member of this august body, since last January, I think it was, I think you've heard me complain loud and often about my 0.9%. That being said, I don't think it's unfair that there be proportionate representation. You notice I didn't address that in my missive to this group, because I don't think it's unfair. What I do think is unfair is when the big gorillas, if you will, the one next to me and the one on down the table, decide that what's going to happen is we're just not going to have to listen to you anymore. I mean, maybe you can outvote me, but at least
Is
give me
somebody
a right.
talking in the room?
But at least give me a right to be heard. And I think that that's what people on the Lower Cape are concerned about in general about county government. I think it's all the way down here in Barnstable. You can't imagine how many people in Truro say, oh, all the way to Barnstable. It's like, Hyannis is New York City or something. But there is a fear of the Cape Cod Commission. There is a reluctance to understand or want to participate in county government. And I think that cutting off the Lower Cape by a regional representation is not going to help that. It's going to make that alienation worse. And I don't think it's productive for the county. It's already true that people down in Truro say, wastewater problem? We don't have one. They have one down there at the Mass Military Reservation. They've got a big one down there, but we don't have one. And to the extent that what we need to do is to build consensus around some of these bigger issues, I think we can only do so by trying to involve people at the local level in a rational way. And I don't think that asking the managers of the towns to be an advisory committee is the way to do that. I think you need a elected body that has some oversight. And just to address that issue, if you read the county charter, there are places where it says that this body has the right to amend matters that come before it, things that are presented to it. However, we apparently believe that we don't have that authority. I think some clarification of that might be in order. But I'm endorsing what Spiro says about having the oversight be in this assembly as the legislative body. So, there you go.
I have to jump in here because I used this analogy once before the town meeting, and I got grief for it for years and years. But so I'm going to do it again. But at the end of The Wizard of Oz, and Dorothy says to the wizard, or what's his name there, well, I want to go home when I go home. And he says, well, so you've always had the power to go home. You just haven't used it, and the ruby slippers, And I thought to myself, and I told the town meeting, I said, you have the power to do whatever it is I was speaking of. I don't remember what it was, but we have the power to amend the budget. We can take the budget and rip it apart and send it to almost unrecognizable back to the commissioners, and it's the same way as any legislative body does. And I've not encouraged that, and I think that the members of the Finance Committee have been around a long time, have not encouraged that, because by and large, except for a few issues, we pretty much got along. But I mean, if the members and people in this room have other priorities, or we feel we have a divergent view of county government than the commissioners do, we have a perfect right to send an alternative, to send an alternative budget to them, and then we'll go to a reconciliation process. And if we have 2/3 of a vote, we can pass just about anything we want. And that's including ordinances. Anybody here can submit an ordinance, to make a budget transfer or so on. So I think that we should all go back to the charter and realize that the Assembly has a lot more power than you think we do. And did you want to say something? But I was going to say, all right, I'll get you after that. Another thing is that, and I haven't run any written comments because, of course, Julie and I are going to have a vote on this commission. There's 25 of us, and it's not a weighted vote, fortunately. But the issue really is because of the way our budget is structured, we tend to think of county government as the budget that we get. In other words, the issues that we get. But county government is quite extensive beyond that. I mean, the Cape Cod Commission itself is huge in its effect on the population of Cape Cod and development of Cape Cod. Then we have things like the Workforce Investment Board, which I was totally unfamiliar with, which has its own budget. We have the Cape Light Compact, which goes through millions of dollars. So the commission, I should say, has taken a more inclusive view of what county government is. And if you read the report of the recent report by the auditors, they did an analysis of county government, they took an inclusive view too. This is what Barnstable County does. That is almost I'd say an accident of geography. If we lived in the middle of the state, there would be a lot of overlapping authorities. There would be this commission over here and that committee over there, and they might affect some towns and others. Because of the geography of the Cape, all of these entities have a distinct geographic area, and that's why we call it the Cape Cod Regional Government. So I'm wondering, as we go down this road, whether or not the commission is going to look at the Cape Cod Regional Government in a more inclusive view, and if they do make changes in the executive branch, they're going to give them more authority over a lot of these agencies, which now people are not aware of. Julia says quite right, people aren't aware of county government. Well, one of the reasons is because it's over here and it's over there and it's over there and it's all scattered around, and they have different representations. The collaborative, the wastewater collaborative is part of county government, but they have their own authority. So that's the issue. I agree that when this first started, I was absolutely sure that they were aiming that there were some people who wanted to get rid of the assembly, and I have to say that hasn't proven to be the case. As a matter of fact, now the commissioners are more under the gun than we are. They're looking at changing the executive branch, and I think that if there is any consensus that has come out of the committee so far, it's a stronger executive branch, and I think that that's either putting more authority in the administrator, as we do with home rule charters, whereas now he doesn't do a lot of hiring and firing. And the other thing is, the suggestion that the towns be more involved through either the boards of selectmen or the town managers. I don't think that's a good process. And the reason I don't think it's a good process is because county government deals directly with the population of Barnstable County. we don't go through, we provide services for the towns, but because of the emphasis on regionalization, people are starting to think of county government as helping, it's certainly a collaboration of the 15 towns, and now we're helping everybody out, but in truth, we deal directly with issues that are not town-related. I mean, things like Children's Cove and stuff like that. I mean, we're not dealing with towns, we're dealing with the population, and I think that should be the emphasis of, my personal view is that should be the emphasis of county government dealing with the 250,000 people on Cape Cod, and certainly a lot of that is going to have to be done through the town governments. They have departments of health and so on and so forth. But anyway, so while I'm on this, the issue with the Cape Cod Commission, the reason the Cape Cod Commission gets away with this one-man, one-vote thing is because they, until recently, didn't have the ability to enact their own legislation. It had to come through us. So, and we have a weighted vote, so we represent the populace. So if we pass an ordinance, then we're covered. Yeah, they don't vote. And also, the idea of amending, these are random thoughts now, but the idea of amending a district of critical planning concern, the problem is they have to, by law, go through a complicated process of public hearings and so on, and taking testimony and making votes and subcommittee hearings and so on. So we're trying to get away from the point of them going through this whole legal process. Then it comes to us and we say, well, we're going to change that right here, right now, today. And I don't know if that's necessarily a good process. I think sending it back and going through the same process of public hearings is a much better process than simply saying, well, you've done all that. Because otherwise somebody standing up in front of a subcommittee hearing of the Cape Cod Commission in Truro or Falmouth is going to say, why am I wasting my time? No matter what I say, it's going to go up to the assembly and do what they want anyway. So I think that there's whether you like it or not, there's a reason why they do what they do. And so that's it. But I'm very encouraged by the process so far. I really am. I've lost a lot of my cynicism. There's been some excellent comments made by people. They were all positive, despite the differences in whether people should be elected or appointed. Almost all the speakers have been positive about county government, saying it's necessary. They've been positive about the bicameral legislation. They think there should be an executive branch and a legislative branch. And if anything, the suggestion is that county government should become more proactive and more, of a part of the Cape Cod community and dealing with the problems we have. So our next meeting is coming up next Wednesday. They seem to have it on alternate Wednesdays, so that we have to drag ourselves here anyway. But so far it hasn't been too bad. So, anyway, yes, Teresa.
Yeah, I actually just want to share my 7 points because not everyone heard them, and I think they're important. The first thing my point is exactly what you just said, Ron, which is that the current charter is something that I'd like to make sure everyone's kind of really aware of what it says, because the print and the implementation of it aren't exactly the same. And some of what the conversation I've heard floating around has been complaints about things that are already in there on a number of different levels. And so I think you need to know where you are before you know where you want to go. And kind of part and parcel of that is understanding what currently works well. And really looking at it, instead of saying, let's pick apart what doesn't work, what works well, and how can we replicate that over and over again. The other thing something I'd wanted to flag was what one of the committee members had flagged the previous week of being certain to separate process and structure from any individual people, because there were a couple times conversations started to go down that rabbit hole. And the underlying question is, forget about what's there. Does that structure enable a certain kind of action? Does that structure encourage a certain kind of action? And I think it's really important to keep a focus on that, because the structure, individuals can always overwhelm a structure, but a core structure suggests certain kinds of outcomes and actions. And I think that's the question that's really important to keep focused on. The third point that I think is very, very important is to be aware of the 21st century operating environment and look at what trend lines are. So, for example, on a larger scale, collaboration happens more frequently in cooperation, but the notion of creating a consolidated, centralized plant is so very 1950s and 1970s, that there are other ways to work other than one huge central blob in the middle. That doesn't mean that cooperation doesn't happen. It doesn't mean that things don't come together. But sometimes when we hear the word regionalization, you picture this, new ginormous layer of governance in there, and that is not the way the 21st century works. And I think it's important for people to be aware of how things are trending and develop a structure that ends up with an organization that's agile and responsive and reflects the way the world is evolving. My other thing I keep coming back to is that one of the things I really like about the way we work here is we are representative of individual citizens of the region. And some of the models that have been pointed to elsewhere are councils of governments, where the entity, like in Franklin County, right, Franklin County does some things that work really well, but there's the government that people point to isn't. It's a membership organization of 26 towns that pay a membership fee to a central entity. And that may be a good model, but it's very different from what we have. And it sounds kind of subtle and philosophical, but from the very base level, it's a core difference. And if people are going to advocate changing, and some people have, then I think you need to have your eyes really wide open about what that shift is. Because I think one of the things we do well here is, and why we're sometimes messy, is we do have the voice of a lot of people at a lot of different levels. And that's one of the things about town meeting, right? It can be messy and sloppy and frustrating, but it's people's voices, and that I think really matters. I also think there may not be one straight answer, and why I think this kind of idea of a 21st century hub and spoke kind of concept is interesting, that there's a lot of regional efforts that work well now, and they all have different forms. And to say there is one form that we're going to come from the top and impose upon down is a frightening mistake, but I do hear shreds of that sometimes. I think the challenge is how can many different forms be articulated clearly so that there's no muddiness in what each of those structures is, and then how do we link them together to deliver what's needed across the region as a whole. And I throw out some other sort of structural suggestions, just how important, like we've all said, the balance of the different components are in keeping that together. That if what we want is, that there's a difference between administration and executive leadership. That what you do to administer something is not the same as what you do to take and drive a policy and a change forward. And that I think an appointed administrator is really good. You have an ongoing continuity and ongoing professional COO management. But if what you're looking for is a voice that says, here's our vision, here's the direction we want to go, I think, as many people have said, that having that come from an elected role is the best way to reflect the region as a whole, and the best way to engage people in stating what that vision is. And you can do it as a group of people, but it's by nature, as a group, the structure is going to say we're going to be a more fractured voice. Or you can say we want one stronger voice, and you have that be represented by one person. I don't know that one is righter or wronger, but they imply different kinds of outcomes of that role. And so I think that's a structural question that's important to talk about. And the last thing that I said was what we've all said, which was, it's really great to talk about all this stuff, but unless the committee is recommending financial, structural things, then this is all just talk.
Okay. Leo?
First of all, I'd like to thank my fellow delegates for taking the time to write out their thoughts. It helped me extensively be able to go through and understand where people are thinking and coming from. I just would like to say on, from my own standpoint, my own personal opinions, I don't particularly think I'm going to start with the levels of government with the executive branch. I don't particularly agree that a single executive would be a good answer to replace the current three body of Cape Cod County Commissioners that we have right now. Whether it's elected or appointed, certainly I wouldn't see how appointed would work. And certainly if it was elected, I thought the whole reason for regionalization and talking about county government, again, is to have everyone's voice and everyone's vote have some kind of an input. And I would think that immediately a single elected executive would be, as any good politician, would be focusing where the votes are going to come from, where the people are, where the people live, and would be pretty much, not that interested in the towns that are smaller and that don't carry the votes. It's just human nature. As we were talking, we're talking about the structure, not the actual person in the position. I think the structure itself lends itself to be abused. I don't particularly am in favor of a single strong executive taking, again, the place of the 3 county commissioners. I had said before to this body, and I'll say it again, my personal opinion is I think that if we're looking at the executive branch, we would be better served on the Cape if we had 5 county commissioners, which represented a district, similar to the representatives now serve. We are fortunate right now that the structure, although it does not allow to have a upper, a mid, and a lower Cape representative, we happen to have that. We have an upper, lower, and Cape resident that are serving in those 3 positions. Does that mean that these individuals somehow favor their town or their location? I don't think they do, but let's face it, human nature is human nature, and we have to, when you're setting up the structure for something like this, you have to anticipate things may happen. Currently, the way it is set up, we could have a county commissioner from Sandwich, one from Falmouth, and one from Barnstable. And maybe people from the Wellfleet area that are now being served by a county commissioner up there, and the Harwich area that are being served by one there, would feel that they're not being represented. I don't know. So I think when I look at the executive branch, I really go back to my original comments. I think the best way to handle the executive branch would be to, in fact, separate it into 5 county commissioners, which would, in fact, be elected by districts. So they would be responsible to go back to their communities that they represent and, in fact, bring them into the fold, if you will. The MMA report was an excellent report. I think that the way our county government is currently structured as far as our employees go need to be looked at. I think that we may have to look at changing that around, but that certainly is kind of a different discussion than changing around the executive and legislative branch. I certainly think that, and again, if you read the report, it seems as if we could have a stronger Department of Finance, maybe a stronger individual or a single individual as an executive director. I don't have a problem with looking at that end of it, but not to replace our current executive branch, which is the county commissioners. As far as the legislative branch goes, I think like everyone that first gets to this board, you look at the weighted vote, you kind of, especially if you have a low weight, you kind of feel that it's not working right, but after you're here for a while, it's right, and it works. I think that the legislative branch definitely needs to have the charter looked at a little closer, maybe reviewed again, so that we can maybe have a little bit more input or a more hands-on, if you will, with some of those government agencies that presently exist that are out there but are kind of not even supervised by anyone. Maybe that kind of in-depth kind of look has to take and bring those in and fold them into the duties of the current legislative body, which is the Assembly of Delegates. That pretty much wraps it up. I think that, again, after listening to everyone's arguments and discussions on it, I really appreciate it. But I haven't been swayed to see that we need any major changes at this point. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll try and speak quick because I know we're getting tired of some of this at this point. But I'll let go a little bit of what Leo said in the sense, first, I want to thank all of you that have taken the time to go to these meetings. I couldn't, which was a disappointment because it's very interesting to me. So thank you for doing that. And also, thank you for putting your ideas to paper. It's helped me as well think about where I stand today. And after listening to everything I've heard, I would say I'm very strongly inclined to agree with the delegate from Harwich that a 5-member board of county commissioners as opposed to 3 has a better, in my view, a better chance of functioning. Whether or not we could go to 5 districts, I think that has a lot to be said for it. So that's got an awful lot of appeal to me. The second point I wanted to make is one, I don't know if it's been discussed or not, and I don't know if it was discussed, Julia, the first time around, but I always think back on my town because our budgets are similar. The budget for the county and the budget for Provincetown are very similar, so I look at where I see commonality and differences in terms of governance. And one of them is that we have a Charter Enforcement Commission. I would assume all of your towns do as well. And yet, the way we're structured, if someone or some group thinks we're violating our charter, what's their recourse? I guess court, which I guess no one's ever done, and why would you want to? So the delegate from Eastham's absolutely correct. There are a number of things in the charter that are not being followed, whether it's having a county clerk, whether it's having a financial, however that's split between the administrator and finance, and yet these are things that people are all saying need to be fixed. Well, you don't fix them by changing the charter, you fix them by enforcing the charter. So it's kind of ironic we're all working on changing the charter. I would ask the special commission to consider the issue of charter enforcement. Perhaps it's a task that would be delegated to the Assembly of Delegates. Lastly, on the issue of the weighted vote and how you solve that, I'm only 52 next week, but I've paid attention to politics a long time, like all of you have. I am convinced at this stage, from the top of government right down to the very bottom, that the answer to a lot of problems is term limits. I believe it wholeheartedly now for Congress more than ever. I moved to Provincetown when we didn't have term limits. We have them now. They are not true term limits in the sense that you're not banned from ever running. The way it works in our town is, as a selectman, you can have 3 terms, then you have to take 2 years off, and then you can run again. And it has absolutely reinvigorated government, because folks run, as opposed to what happened years before. We had people there for decades and decades. I would never have used some of the words that were used to describe the bigger town vote here, but most certainly some folks have been here a lot longer than others. So I think that's an issue that also the special commission might want to discuss. Again, it's not forcing you all out. It's saying take 2 years off or 3. And then if you can make your case, come back. So those are the ideas I would send your way, Ron. Thank you.
I've been a member of this. I probably would be terminated out under your conditions, and maybe that would be a good thing. But I've always thought that the way the Assembly votes on a weighted vote is essential to our success. And it has been a very successful and small and lean and mean county government, and I think we should continue that. And hopefully this commission will come out to some of those conclusions. The one thing that I've always thought about in the back of my mind, with no offense to the present gorillas in the room, is that we could maintain that one person, one vote if we limited the ability of a town to have just one representative. There might be a limit of 10 or 11 or 12% for one person. So a town like Barnstable or a town like Falmouth would have 2 reps. One for the north side, one for the south side, one for East Falmouth, one for West Falmouth. It would put mute some of the constant criticism I've seen and heard for the last 15 years. It's just a modest proposal.
I'd like to make another quick comment. If you go back to, you all remember grammar school when you understood how our country was set up and the debates that led up to the signing of the Constitution. They debated a long time between having an authoritative person, not a king, but a powerful one-person administrator. Hamilton pushed this and so on, as opposed to Jefferson's idea if he wanted a democracy where the power was all split among a lot of different people. And we have this bicameral government to try to merge those two. I was in agreement when we had our charter review committee about expanding the number of county commissioners, but I've since changed my mind. I'll tell you why. It's because the whole idea of an executive branch is to have authority. In other words, if somebody's making decisions, if you have an executive branch that's too split up, then what you do is you have to hire a powerful administrator. So if we have a powerful administrator, then we have an executive branch who's split up between 5 people, then we have a legislative branch. Really, that the authority is diminished. You have to have somebody running the show. You have to have somebody who hires and fires, somebody who does the day-to-day stuff, somebody who makes decisions. Then you have to have a legislative body that represents the people and can do policy making and financial oversight. So expanding the Board of Commissioners sort of puts them in the never-never land between administrative and legislative. I mean, I'm not saying I wouldn't support it, but we're getting too close to, I think it's getting too close to having two legislative bodies instead of one. Although the regional approach to electing the commissioners, like Leo mentioned, might be a good idea, simply because it would prevent, I mean, when I first started in the Assembly, they were all bunched up at the other end of the Cape, so, I mean, but please feel free to submit any other more comments you want. I don't, yeah, go ahead, Tom.
I tend to agree with what Julia was saying earlier about if you were going to dramatically change the types of things we were going to be doing, that you might look differently at the structure. I personally feel the present structure we have functions very well. As a town that doesn't and hasn't had a county commissioner, from that town for a while, I feel no less represented. I see Commissioner Doherty, I see the other commissioners around. They attend our meetings. They're very, interactive with us that way. If, however, you were looking at a model, and I like the fact that they run at large, because I think all three of them, they have to look at and blend their campaigns into trying to represent us all. And I think that helps with the vision and the way they're going to try to run the executive branch. If, however, you were looking at a more streamlined structure, as has been described, the model is somewhat along the lines of, the way the town of Barnstable functions right now, with the most popular form of government in the country right now, a manager with a town council form of government, where if we were to go to a single manager and have the legislature, this legislative body, functioning as the way the town council does, we would have the power to appoint the chief administrative officer. So we would increase our own ability to have influence over the way the county is run by appointing that person, hiring and firing that person, and that person coming back to us with their agenda. But it's very clear, in order to run an operation like this, it's the more singular you can make it in terms of being efficient in delivering the services that you're trying to deliver on the executive side. None of us runs any of the service. We don't run we don't run Children's Cove. We're not trying to be Bill Clark with the County Extension Service. They've hired good administrators, and I think that speaks well to the system as it is now. They have very good administrators there. But were we to have a manager, Assembly of Delegates form of government, we'd be expecting that person to be doing the hiring, firing. There'd be certain appointments that would come back to us for ratification, I would assume. But we'd be the one evaluating that individual. We'd be the one, annually looking at, how that individual is performing and how the services are being developed. So, but I would tend to weigh in on the side of those who have said that the current structure, I think, with the current duties that we have, is functioning well.
Mr. Speaker?
Yes.
I'll submit this in writing as well, but since you're here, I don't know if you're going to put this on the agenda again for next meeting, but for you to take back to the Special Commission and for the League of Women Voters who are here, for anyone who is recommending regionalizing any of the current office holders by district, please work out some mechanics on how that happens, because clerks in our towns are already confused with the way that the Assembly of Delegates get selected now within town borders. If we were to cross town borders by district, we may have to get additional signatures, or we may not have to get additional signatures from the other towns the way the county commissioners do now. Their signatures have to be spread out over several towns. They can't all come from the same town. The timing of the elections may change. Right now, we get to skip primaries in September and go right to November. Are we talking about creating a timing falling within the timing of the current election so as not to burden the town's electoral process, by which we would default become partisan office holders as opposed to nonpartisan office holders? Those are just a lot of questions. It's fine to be able to say maybe we should look at being elected by district, but then you got to work out the details. I think that was what the genius of this charter is. Somebody actually sat down and figured out the details 20 years ago, and just saying we should be the other way, you still got to do the homework.
Yeah. Well, to be continued, as they say, we have a meeting in a week. Do you want to add something to that, or?
I just wanted to ask a question as to what we think is there some interest in this group in trying to make a formal presentation to the special commission? And if so, is there enough consensus here to be able to do that? Or, how do we see whatever we think here being communicated to that?
Well, that goes to a question that hasn't been entirely answered yet, and that is what happens once we come to a decision. In other words, what happens once the Special Commission on County Government comes to, if it ever does, 25 of us come to an agreement, where does it go from there? Is it going to go directly to the ballot, in which case they'd have to organize petition drives and so on to put it on the ballot, or would it go through the normal process that's set up in the charter, which means it would come to us first? I suspect right now, and I know why I'm saying this, that both former Senator Rauschenbeck and O'Leary intend to include both us and the commissioners. And I mean, first of all, against my better judgment, this commission is reporting to the commissioners, believe it or not. They set it up so that they're actually going to go back to the commissioners, and I think it's going to come to us. Meanwhile, anyone is willing, I didn't feel that it was in my place to represent the Assembly's position, although I do. I mean, because none of these people were appointed, but not appointed to represent certain groups. In other words, we're all, and Julia did give an intro to Assembly 101 early on. It's what we do. But I think that what the role of the current county structure is in formulating recommendations going on is going to be decided within the next 2 meetings, and if it isn't, I'm going to push it. In other words, we're going to have to ask them, where's it going to go? Is it going to come back to us, and so on? So that's really the issue. Yeah, Julia?
I think it'll be interesting to see whether people really, I'm not sure that there's enough people who want to would want to put it on the ballot, and that might be a method. On the other hand, it might be more convenient to have it come to the Assembly. But if it's going to be eliminating the Assembly and the majority of the Assembly doesn't like that idea, that could be problematic.
Well, I mean, if it eliminated the commissioners, they have to go before the commissioners. So
well, but I don't think that the commissioners vote on whether the charter gets changed.
No, they do not.
But I personally, unless there's a real sense of mission change, as I said, I'm not eager for a big change. But if there is a sense of that and there's a push to make a big change, it would be easier to change. It would be easier to do that change if it passed the Assembly, because then it goes directly on the ballot. Right. Now, it's a little tactless for us to point that out at the
I don't mind doing that at all.
Meeting.
Tactless? You got it right.
But I presume they understand it. But at any rate, so that's an issue, I think.
Well, I've made a decision. I decided that I am going to present that at the appropriate time to the commission, to the full commission, saying the Assembly is willing to, if they make recommendations and we feel they have a consensus, they can come to us. This is the path of least resistance. We could vote, go through the procedure and put it on the ballot. If they come up with some resistance or for some reason think that we're, just feathering our nests and they can go to Plan B. But I agree with you. I think that's what they should do. I think they should come to us. So, not surprisingly. Anyway, I think we've beat this subject to death right now. Okay, so the next is a report from the committees, and we don't have any committee reports. Report from the clerk. Come on, guys, try to get out of here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a few items. A reminder about the holiday gathering. I haven't got a response from everyone, but as soon as you can let me know and pay up, that'd be great. 19. And heads up, we received a request for a supplemental appropriation this evening from the commissioners. That's going to trigger a public hearing. There is some concern about doing that as soon as possible, which means we'll probably have a meeting of the Finance Committee on December 21st, just prior to the Assembly meeting. I've got to talk to the chairperson, maybe 3:30-ish. So you'll be receiving notice of that as well, but I thought as long as I had the opportunity, I'd let you know right now.
Okay.
And that's it, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, Janice and I and Tom, John Oman, have begun to put together the budget for the Assembly as part of the overall budget process. We're hoping to accelerate the process this year. Last 2 years, they were a month late in producing a budget for us, but they've submitted a time frame to Janice, and it seems like they're going to be on time this year. We'll have to see. So that's going to be, we'll talk about that at the next meeting. Other than that, I know there's one other thing, but I forgot what it was, so it couldn't be too important.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?